All right, Wednesday, video 3, chapter 8. So we're up to 1969, and we're talking now. We spent some time talking, giving some historical context. Now we're going to talk about some of the great pop culture elements that came along in 69. We already heard the number one record of the year, Sugar Sugar, by what is essentially a group of comic book characters, the Archies. And one of the other pop culture thrusts that happened in 69 that I want you to be aware of is a thing called the rock opera. And the rock opera would give us some great stuff through the 1970s, certainly. Couple of big products that you might have heard of: Jesus Christ Superstar, not the individual, the rock opera, and Tommy were both, by The Who, were both rock operas in the early and mid 70s. The one that sort of kicked off was a musical called Hair. And Hair was a Broadway show. It was off Broadway, and then it came anyway. You know what I mean. It was a theatrical experience. Hair basically dealt with the lack of understanding and the lack of connection between the younger generation and their parents. And Hair was the sort of pinpoint of where these generations diverged, because you had young men, particularly in the late 60s, who the style was to wear the hair very long, shoulder length or longer, as would be said in the lyrics. This was very against what had even been the case in the early 60s. The early 60s was definitely the year of the buzz cut or the high and tight. I mean, you see, men from that era, and their hair is very short, very close crop to the head. So within a span of 10 years, all of a sudden, you've got guys who are wearing their hair like girls. And so Hair the musical appealed to people of the younger generation. Music was included in the musical that was specifically targeted to or appealing to the younger generation. It's also true that the musical involved nudity. So you would have actors on stage who appeared without clothing. This sort of gave it a cachet and made people go like, oh, let's go to the theater and see this, this dirty musical. So that definitely gave it a little clout, a little status in terms of what people wanted to see. There were several hit records released, but nothing was bigger than the medley of two songs from the film, Aquarius and Let the Sunshine In, by a band named the Fifth Dimension. Fifth Dimension would be a great soft rock and rhythm and blues band from late 60s into the mid 70s, really. They had 3 or 4 pretty strong years. Aquarius, Let the Sunshine In, give it a spin. Fifth Dimension from Hair. Good song. Fifth Dimension, Aquarius, Let the Sunshine In from Hair. The next song that I want you to listen to is the title track. It's called, well, Hair. Thus, the phrase title track. Hair by a Rhode Island band, just down the road, the Cowsills. And the Cowsills was a family act that would become the model, if you will, for a band called the Partridge Family that we'll talk about in a minute. But Hair by the Cowsills. Give it a listen. Cowsills, Hair. And as I mentioned, the Cowsills were the blueprint for the Partridge Family. And the Partridge Family, just a quick aside, they would come around right around 1970, and the Partridge Family was a TV show and a rock band, and it was fronted by sort of a teen idol named David Cassidy and his mom on TV, who was also his stepmother in real life. It's a lot of information. Bottom line is, in the same idea as the Archies, you had a band where most of the people in the band didn't play and didn't sing. It was kind of a front for studio musicians, but the Partridge Family became a big hit. They were modeled after the Cowsills, and the model was single mom and a bunch of kids put a rock group together and traveled around and became a big hit. Although the Cowsills were not, the mother was not single, it was the mother and the teenage kids, mostly teenage kids, who came together and formed a rock band, and they had some hits. Hair, one of the biggest. Okay, so again, the rock operas were important because they often contained songs that were appealed to the younger generation. It was really the first time the younger generation embraced musicals. I mean, our musical theater friends in the class will tell you that the classic American musicals like South Pacific and Oklahoma and My Fair Lady, you know, these are amazing pieces of music, amazing pieces of theater. But to the younger generation in 1969, no, that was mom and dad's stuff. You know, Sound of Music, the sound of, not for me, thank you. So Hair was the first time the younger generation really embraced the form of a musical. Again, it was controversial. There was nudity involved. Let's go. All right, Hair. Velvet Underground, next up on the list. And we talked about, I don't know, because again, Velvet Underground was a rock band that formed in large part thanks to the work of a Pittsburgh-born, New York-based pop artist named Andy Warhol. Andy Warhol brought people together that he found interesting and promising and really worked to further their art, if you will. And Velvet Underground was a kind of a pet project of his. And Lou Reed, lead singer of the Velvet Underground for a lot of its life. And Lou Reed, of course, well, he would go on to his own career as a rock and roll superstar. Let's give a listen, though. Velvet Underground, man. Sweet Jane. Sweet Jane, Velvet Underground. It's a great song. And one of the things that I find great about that song is it could have been released 25 years later. And you can't say that a lot about a lot of music. You know, music has sort of its timestamp, its imprint. But Sweet Jane by Velvet Underground definitely could have been sounded fresh and new in the mid 90s at the very least. Rock and Roll, another song from Velvet. Same thing, man. This could have come out 25 years later. Okay, again, I'm listening and I'm not, being aware. All right, so Velvet Underground, that was the deal with that. I know I told you that we would get to the Beatles in this, but I think I'll save the Beatles for Friday and I'll let you go. Have a great day, and we'll be back on Friday talking about the Beatles, talking about Woodstock. See you on the other side. Bye. That's my new catchphrase. It's not bad. I'm sure somebody else used it first. I'll have to look that up. Look it up for me. Get back to me. See you on the other side. Who used that first? If nobody took it, it's mine.